Good morning and welcome to another episode of Iconic Freedom, the formula. We are setting a standard for accountability, the ownership of your choices, and responsibility, that ability to respond to those choices. Let each care for self and all will be cared for.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my parents are from Israel, and growing up, I had an Orthodox bar mitzvah at a Chabad temple, really good temple. So, it's like the very traditional Jewish bar mitzvah. But going into my teens, of course, there's that natural rebellious phase when you're growing up. So I became this radical leftist. And I used to write in the school newspaper about how conformity and capitalism and all these things that you would see in every big newspaper now. And I was like that for years, about halfway through college. This is, 2008, 2009, 2010. But then things started to change, especially when it came to Israel, because, my family is from there. I still have family living there. And then you have these conflicts that happen every couple of years. And I saw how the media would distort the reality of the situation. And it was a reality that I knew was completely false, that they were pushing out to their readers or their viewers. So it started with this small crumb that you latch onto. And before you know it, you start pulling the string. And you think, well, if this is false, then how much of everything else that I believe is false? So I just kept on pulling at that string and realized that everything I had believed in was just completely untrue. So starting around 2010, I became this avid reader.
When I start talking about, how did this happen, right? When the awakening, how does this awakening happen? And something that just caught my ear when I was listening to this particular podcast being broadcast, the thing that really stood out to me was how he described how this particular situation for himself and this unfolding. And it immediately made me think of, this might be good to talk about for the podcast, understanding that this year is about the awakening. This is Dr. Eithan Haim. He was on the Seraphin show, which I listen to that quite often. So it's kind of cool to be able to hear this. And what he's talking about, I like the imagery of that, is that he started to uncover things. He started to read things. And then he started to kind of tug at that string. So, and of course, at some point you pull on the string and then you keep pulling it like you're undoing a sweater, right? If you keep pulling at it, what does it do? It unravels. And then the reality is right there in front of you of what this sweater was actually made of. Well, that's the reality of life, exactly, and which I thought was so interesting to me, and very entertaining in that sense to hear the story, because as things start to unravel, we want to be in delusion. We don't want to believe, right? We don't want to believe what other people, are saying that is against the ideology that we have been holding. Okay, so a friend of mine said this analogy, which I thought it was kind of cool. So I thought that I would, repeat it. And that is the thread to the string, to the rope, to the bell, to the cow. So if it starts in a very small spot, it starts with the thread and it continues to build to the string, to the rope, to the bell, to the cow, you can start to see how things connect. Now, I'm going to analogize this to the supply chain, right? It's the supply chain of your life. It's the supply chain of understanding the laws of nature, right? What are the laws of nature? That is the observation of reality without any emotion. So, and not an easy task, right? For people that I want to say are damaged, for lack of a better term, in that they live in their emotions. We've talked about it on the podcast before. Your emotions are a place. They are a moment in time, a split millisecond to bring your attention to something. They're not there to continue to live. You don't live in your emotions. And you hear these people all the time, it's just like, oh, follow your heart, all this blah. It's like, oh my gosh, run from those people immediately because they don't know what they're talking about. And what are they doing? They are finding a way to avoid personal responsibility. They're finding a way to avoid accountability. And what they're doing, like your emotions are your body's expression of its truth. It's holistic truth. It's understanding in that very moment something's not right. Something is harmonious. Something is enjoyable. Something is dangerous. Well, then if you let the brain come in, the stupidest part of us, with all of its stories, then it wants to disable the body's natural response. So I'm going to say that again. Your emotions are your body's expression of its truth. And then the brain wants to come in and it wants to give you a story and it wants to disable the body from its natural response. Because when you're interacting with somebody and you have a slight little, that's something to pay attention to. But then there are these things, these delusions, these histories, this perceived idea. You let all this stuff in that tries to give you a story, a background story, some sort of, idea of, oh, well, they weren't feeling good. They were this, they were that. No. No. You are then denying what your body, you are disabling the body's natural response. And in doing so, you're no longer in reality. Now you're in delusion. The level of the delusion is different for everybody, right? But if you are not paying attention, you're not developing that expression of your truth by paying attention to what the body's doing, then you're going to find yourself down a rabbit hole very quickly, right? That's kind of how it works. So you start to develop you personally develop self by owning your choices, making the connection between your choices and the outcomes. Because all of your choices create an outcome. And if you're not paying attention and you're just kind of, flippantly, running through the world and not looking and then wondering, why is that happening? Why is that happening? Why did that person respond that way? Why did that guy cut me off? Because you're not paying attention to your choices. You're not in the moment. You're not cognizant of what's happening. And thereby, you're not using your intelligence. And the only way you get to your intelligence is to be out of the ideology. And how do you get out of the ideology? You stop living in your emotions.
I never really read books before growing up because, I was too busy getting into trouble with my friends and my brother. But yeah, around 2010, I started just reading hundreds and hundreds of books about history, about communism, capitalism, the American Revolution. And I mean, every topic you can imagine, a lot about World War II. And it really kind of formed the foundation of this, political bedrock, the way I see the world now. But one thing that really stands out during that time is, I would read all these stories and think that none of this is ever going to happen during my lifetime. Like, things are so calm, they're so placid that these world-changing events are a thing of the past. But all that changed in 2020, and it's like that saying from I think Hemingway, where it happens gradually and then all of a sudden, because I knew that things were changing, but they happened all of a sudden in 2020.
What's really great about his awakening is that he was willing to forego the delusion for the reality and let the reality be whatever it is. So, I mean, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Reality, let it be your friend. Don't shy away from it. Don't try to avoid it. Just allow yourself to see it. Be open to it. And, just like the good doctor talked about, that you'll start to pull at that thread and you'll start to unmask whatever is going on in the world around you. This could be to yourself, the reality to yourself. You stop deluding yourself. You stop trying to attribute certain things to people and objects and animals, and instead you just observe it for what it is, right? You're observing the world around you and the world as it presents itself to you. So if you decide not to accept the reality of a finite universe, which we live in, and some people will tell you we don't, but if you don't, then you will always be surprised when the reality of that finite universe presents. So now I want to cross-apply this to life itself. If you do not accept the reality of what you observe, then you're going to be surprised when that reality finally presents itself. Here's a great example. The couple that so-and-so cheated on me. They didn't cheat on you. You did not accept the reality, and then you were surprised when the reality finally escalated to the reality of presenting itself. Life whispers in your ear. It will slap you across the face, and then it will keep knocking you upside the head until you figure it out, until you get it. What is it you're trying to get? The reality. You're trying to see the world as it is, not as you want it to be, not in some fantasy, not in some romanticism, not all of that shenanigans and tomfoolery. The world as it truly is. When you see the world truly as it is, you will allow yourself the beauty of everything around you. I can't even tell you how my life has changed in ways that I never thought that it would. But it all stems from the fact that I became accountable and responsible. I made the connection between the choices I made and the outcomes that came from it. And then I kept, zhuzhing that. I kept, tweaking it and understanding it and realizing where I was deluding myself, where I was playing a game with myself, where I was playing games with others. I'm trying to get people to do this, or I'm trying to, I want this person to do that. Yeah. Right. Listen, it's all about you. It's all about your self-interest. So when I talked about the thread to the string, to the rope, to the bell, to the cow, it is your self-interest to your choices, to which you need to be responsible, responsible, and accountable, connecting to those choices, what those outcomes are, and managing your life by being in reality, and to not delude yourself by telling yourself a story for you or for anybody else in your world. You don't tell a story, you just observe the story, and you stay out of your emotions as much as you can.
The people who had the most power and the ability to make a difference had decided to stay silent. And it goes to show the strength of the ideology in academic medical centers. Because no matter who you are, you could be the top surgeon in your field. But if you transgress this neoliberal leftist ideology, they will take you out no matter who you are. And with surgeons, we put so much time and effort into our careers that for so many people, there's this fear that we give it all up and for making a stand. And so many of us think that, well, we have this mortgage, we have this career we have to take care of, we have to take care of our family. So we have to maintain our career. But I think it's a false calculation because they don't realize that if they don't confront these issues, if they don't fight against it, what they're really doing is just passing that fight along to their children. So they think they're taking care of their kids, but they're really not, because the world they're delivering their children into is a much more dangerous world than the one they grew up in. So they think that by staying silent, they're protecting their children themselves, but what they're really doing is just foregoing the fight that needs to be had. They're just taking care of themselves. So
that clip is so rich with understanding of everything that we talk about on this podcast. The self-interest of trying to protect what you already have. Like he mentioned, I've got a mortgage and a family and yeah. Okay. And so you're trying to protect that. And in the same vein, you're also trying to, in his case, he's trying to protect his children. And he's realizing that in not talking about his situation, I should have talked about this, but his whole issue was about he's a whistleblower for the transgender stuff that was happening in Dallas in one of the hospitals, and he became a whistleblower on the whole thing. So he's talking about how during the pandemic, it started to reveal itself, and then as the reality unfolded, he saw more and more of what was really going on, and understanding that, listen, if it's not me that's going to stand up and say something, who is going to do it? And then understanding whether or not he wants to do that. Does he have that constitution within him to be able to stand up to the deep state? Because in a sense, that's really what this is all about. Is trying to stand up and have your voice heard in his situation for something that he knew was against the laws of nature, right? It was against the oath that he took of do no harm. So he's sitting there talking about how, all of these things are happening, and he and his wife are trying desperately to decide, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? And they come to their Jesus moment, in a sense, and they're understanding, if not us, then who? If not now, then when?
Whistleblowing is it's such a personal, every single situation is its own. So let's dig into it.
Yeah. So for me, it really starts a little bit earlier in 2020 with COVID, because, maybe for like a week, I kind of had bought into it, but then I quickly realized that what they were perpetuating were lies and propaganda. That masking, social distancing, contact tracing were not measures that you use to control a pandemic like COVID. These are not things that make rational sense. They have no therapeutic rationale behind it. And it's one thing to describe it in theoretical terms, but in the hospital every day, you see what happens on the ground. So for me, I was taking care of hundreds and hundreds of people. So I saw countless people who suffered and died alone in the hospital without their loved ones, without ever having the chance to say goodbye. And that was one of the most painful things to ever see. And the whole time you're going through it, you think that someone's going to stand up and say something about it. Someone has to realize this is all crazy. But as I progressed more and more, it was just getting crazier and crazier, and no one was saying anything.
Was anyone talking like in break rooms or on the side, like, hey, this is terrible. Like, we just had an old lady die and we told her family they couldn't come in?
The way it would work is we would have to sub-communicate. I had to sub-communicate with other residents. So I would have to say something kind of benign, to another resident who I thought might think in a similar way.
So you're like sounding them out to kind of see if they agree with you.
Kind of like in East Germany.
Yeah.
Right. Where you say one thing to see if they're like on the same wavelength. And then maybe a couple of weeks go by, then you say something else. And then you say something else. And before you know it, you're organizing, just you and this other person or two other people. in like dark corners to talk about how
I
crazy
really
they are.
enjoyed the journey that this gentleman spoke about, and I encourage you to listen to the entire podcast. I found it very fascinating. Lots of enriching things that I thought were part of it. I will put the link down below so that you can hear it for yourself. It's on Rumble with the Kyle Seraphin Show. I mean, truly remarkable. Nature will always have its way with us. And if you're wanting to you want to unravel your delusion, then you have to be open to the reality. So what happens is that little by little, all the data that you've experienced will come together, and in a sense, it will take form, and it'll offer you the opportunity to see everything. So all of these things that are happening in our media, in our government, everything, that once you start to see that reality, you cannot unsee it. But the only way you will get there is that you will have to, in a sense, you gotta 86 your emotions and not let your emotions override your sensibilities. And when you allow that to happen, you stay in the delusion. In a sense, you stay in the disease pattern. So once you open up to it, there is no more cloud. You know, there is no more choice to be made because you see the reality and you already know what you need to do. I mean, sure, you can tell yourself, oh, I need to make a choice to do this or that. No. When you reach that particular point in your life, in your own personal development, there is no choice. There's just doing. And then understanding for yourself, you can handle whatever comes your way. Again, I want to reiterate this. Your emotions are your body's expression of its truth, that holistic truth. And if you let your brain get all mucked up with things and disable your body's natural response, you will never get to the reality. And the only way to get to the reality is you got to 86 the emotions, and you got to be open to the way the world is, not the way you want it to be. And are you going to use your life? Things will happen to people. It always does, right? But it's not what happened to you. It's what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to use it to self-destruct, or are you going to use it for your personal development? You can go one way or the other. What do you want to cultivate? The very basic law of nature, nature's truth, there is no right or wrong. It's the choices that you're making, and all of your choices are correct. But what do you want to do with the choice when presented? And if you keep going and you keep going, you will get to that point where it will be a remarkable thing. There is no choice. You've observed the reality. Thank you. I'm just going to go do this over here. You can do whatever you want. Absolutely. Over there. But you can't do it here. That means we're at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Hit that like button if you would. Share it with your family and friends. You never know what it might do for them. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, that link is down below as well, to my book, lulu.com. And if you get a chance, listen to the interview with Kyle Seraphin and the Good Doctor. Let each care for self, and all will be cared for. Make it a great week.